Hello, my name is Tyler Hatton from F5 Networks. In the next 40 minutes, we're going to walk through how you can configure your ServiceNow environment to perform F5 configurations using the F5 Automation Toolchain. As part of this tutorial, we're going to use two different external resources. The first resource is a ServiceNow developer account. You can sign up for a ServiceNow developer account by going to developer.servicenow.com and clicking the Sign Up button. Once we have a ServiceNow developer account, all we have to do is then click on the Start Building button in the center. What this will do is provision our own instance, our own ServiceNow developer instance that we will use as part of this tutorial to develop this integration around. In our use case, we're going to use the Roam release of ServiceNow. In order to use a Roam release, simply click on the Roam option in the dialog and then click Request. As the dialog suggests, it does take a couple minutes for the instance to come online, but once the instance is available and ready, you should see a prompt on the same screen that basically tells you your instance is ready. Be sure to record the URL that's within that prompt and the username and password. We'll use this later on in the tutorial. Now that we have our ServiceNow environment up and running, the next step that we're going to take is to activate the Integration Hub plugin for our ServiceNow instance. In order to do this, go to developer.servicenow.com, click in the top right, click on Activate Plugin, and then search for Integration Hub. What you should see is an Activate link next to the Integration Hub installer. Click the Activate button, and within a couple minutes, the Integration Hub plugin should be enabled for your ServiceNow environment. The second tool we'll be using is a tool called Terraform. Terraform is an infrastructure provisioning tool that we'll be using to provision some generic objects within ServiceNow as we build out our demonstration. To get access to Terraform, go to terraform.io, then click the download button in the top right. Once on that screen, you'll see a list of executables that you can download for your operating system of choice. If you're following along with the demo, the final thing we need access to is AWS. Now, while AWS may not be a requirement to use ServiceNow, we are going to use AWS a little bit later on for our F5 infrastructure that we're going to manage with our ServiceNow environment. Once the proper tools are set up, the next step that we're going to take is to clone down the repository containing our base ServiceNow configuration. A link to this repository will be provided in the description of the video. In order to clone down this command, we need to run a git clone command and then the link to our repository, or alternatively, we can download a zip file containing our files as shown on the screen. Once we have our demo files cloned down to our local file system, we're going to open it up inside of our text editor of choice. In my case, I'm using Visual Studio Code. Inside of Visual Studio Code, what I'm going to do is copy this terraform.tfvars.example file and create my own terraform.tfvars. What I'm going to do with this file is store my URL or my ServiceNow URL, my ServiceNow password, and my ServiceNow username. And this is what we're going to do to authenticate to our specific ServiceNow environment. But let's say we get ourselves into a situation where we maybe forget our admin username and password. It happens to the best of us. To get access to that again, go to developer.servicenow.com where you launch the lab, click in the top right hand corner, and then click on Manage Instance Password. That will give you the instance URL, username, and password. You can even email it to yourself if you want to. Okay, so once we have our latest username and password and URL for our ServiceNow environment, we're going to copy and paste that into that terraform.tfvars file that we had open in Visual Studio Code. Once we have those values copied in, what we're going to do in the terminal window inside of our editor of choice is run a Terraform init. What this will do behind the scenes is basically install the dependencies that we need from a Terraform standpoint in order to perform our ServiceNow and AWS configurations. Once we have those dependencies that we need for Terraform, we can run a Terraform apply, which will create the AWS BigIP instance that we're going to use and our ServiceNow configurations that we're going to use as a base template for our service catalog item. But while we wait for Terraform to configure our ServiceNow and F5 environments, let's take a quick look at a diagram that represents the flow that we're hoping to configure for this demo environment. And the top part of this diagram represents the overall flow that we hope for users to experience as part of this demo environment. At a high level, a user will submit a request to ServiceNow through a service catalog item. We'll see a service catalog item a little bit later on, but this is basically a set of variables or a form that a user will fill out for things such as an F5 VIP or an F5 pool that they hope to configure. ServiceNow will then in turn take those values and submit a REST API request to this thing called F5 Fast or F5 Application Services Templates. F5 Fast will take those values and through a templating structure, which we'll again take a look at a little bit later on, convert those values to an AS3 template, which in turn will turn those into individual F5 objects such as VIPs, pools, profiles, etc. that we'll use for our VIP in our F5 environment. At the bottom part of this diagram represents the outcome we're hoping to achieve through our F5 Fast template. In our case, a very simple LTM VIP that load balances against a pool of Nginx pool members. All right, hopefully at this point what we should see within our terminal session is an apply complete message telling us that our Terraform template has completed execution. And right below that is a list of outputs that were created as part of this Terraform template. Things such as our big IP, public IP, which we'll need a little bit later on, username, and password. Be sure to record these values in a notepad file so we can use them a little bit later on. As you can see, the password is marked as sensitive. To get access to that, simply run terraform output-json, and then you'll see the password in plain text so you can copy it to your notepad. All right, so our Terraform template's complete. We have our F5 credentials, but what's next? The next step of this overall process is we're going to go back to developer.servicenow.com. And what we're going to do is take a look at the configurations that were created by our Terraform template just a second ago. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is on this developer.servicenow.com website, we're going to click this Start Building button right here. And what this will do is basically open up our developer ServiceNow instance that's unique to us that we just created a group of objects on using Terraform. And to see some of these objects, what we're going to do is click on this left-hand side where we're going to maximize the navigator. And I'm going to look into the search bar right here, My Items. And what this will do is basically filter for the catalog items or the catalog item or the form I just created in ServiceNow to basically act as a front end for the creation of a VIP workflow that we showed in the diagram just a second ago. So I'm going to click on My Items. And then what I'm going to filter on is All to bring up all items. And then finally, what we should see at the very top is F5 HTTP VIP. If you don't see it at the top, what you can do is in the corner right here, there you can order by updated. So it shows me the oldest one in this case, but if I filter down kind of like this, what I'll see right here is F5 HTTP VIP. And I'll click on that. And what we should see in just a second is the configurations associated with this catalog item or form that we have as part of this workflow. So if we look at what's called the catalog item right here, and you can see that in the kind of top left area right here, it says catalog item F5 HTTP VIP. What we see in kind of this form is basically a description of our catalog item. The name of the catalog item, where do we want it located in our service catalog that's going to have various different services under it. Which category do we want it under? So in this case, it's under the category network standard changes. Who's the owner? System administrator in this case. Do we want this active or disabled? Do we want it visible or not visible to our end users? But if you look at these are all different configurations that were created as part of that Terraform template. But what we really care about as part of this catalog item, and really the guts of this catalog item, is if we scroll down right here, what we see are the different variables that are associated with this catalog item. So things such as tenant name, application name, virtual address, virtual port, server port. The server address is the pool members that we want to associate with our big IP LTM VIP. These are different variables that we're going to feed into our FAST template in order to spin up our AS3 declaration to create our VIP. But if we hit this try it button right here, what we'll see is basically a very simple demonstration or example of what this service catalog form will look like to our end users. And as we can see right here, what we see are that those same tenant name, application name, server addresses, etc. that we saw a second ago within our list of variables. So it's a one-to-one mapping. When we have a variable inside of that variable list under our catalog item, we'll see the same thing within our form that maps to that. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm just going to click back, and this will bring me back to the previous page that I was on with the catalog item configurations with my variables. And just to provide a little bit more extra clarification as to where these variables come from, why am I specifying those variables within ServiceNow for like tenant name and application name? Where are those variables? What I'm basing those off of is, again, the fast template. And to see that fast template, or the fast template I'm using in this case, what I'm going to do is log into my Big IP device, my virtual Big IP instance that I'm running inside of AWS right now. And I'm going to look at the fast template. And in order to do that, once I'm logged into my Big IP management console, I'm going to click on iApps. And then I'm going to go to Application Services and then Applications LX. And then underneath this screen, what I should see in just a moment, there we go, is a link to F5 Application Services Templates. And this is specifically the FAST application, or F5 Application Services Templates, or FAST for short, portion of the F5 Management Console. Then in my case, to keep things simple, what I'm using is under this example section, the simple HTTP FAST template. So if I click into here, what I should see very quickly are the different variables that I had within my ServiceNow catalog item. So you should see things like tenant name, application name, virtual port, virtual address, and then the list of pool members again that we're load balancing against. This is what I'm basing the variables within ServiceNow off of. It's again a one-to-one mapping. What I have in that catalog item within ServiceNow is what I have in this fast template on my F5 management console. So when I set up my workflow a little bit later on, that gets kicked off when somebody fills out that form. These are the variables that get sent from a REST API request from our ServiceNow environment to our F5 instance that we have right here. And maybe you're curious, from a Terraform standpoint, where are those ServiceNow configurations that are being created? Where are those different variables? Where is that specific service catalog configuration within my Terraform template? And to see that, if you go under modules, ServiceNow, and then under this main.tf file, what we should see are the different specifications that map to the different variables and the service catalog item that you saw just a moment ago within ServiceNow. So if you remember back a couple minutes ago, we saw things such as the name being F5 HTTP VIP being the name of the catalog item. And then our different variables, we see the same thing here. We see an object or a resource being created called tenant name and a resource created called application name, all through this Terraform template and all following kind of the similar Terraform template resource structure that is the same for any type of resource that you create using Terraform. So if we return back to our ServiceNow environment and our catalog item that we were working on a couple minutes ago, what we should see again is the basic description of the catalog item that we're going to have users interact with. But the problem that we have right now with how this service catalog item is configured is if somebody were to fill out this form, so if I click this try it button and somebody were to fill out this form, nothing would happen. There's no underlying workflow to tell ServiceNow to make a call to our F5 fast template to build our F5 VIP. So how do we fix that? And to fix that, the very first step of this is we're going to use this thing called Flow Designer. And to get access to that, what I'm going to do is clear out my search bar right here and then type in Flow Designer. And what you should see inside of the search area right here is a link to this Flow Designer tool that we're going to use to build out this underlying workflow. So it will take a second or two to load up, but once it's up, we should see the beginnings of the Flow Designer interface. But what is this Flow Designer interface that's in front of us right now? Before we actually build out our F5 specific flow, how about we take a look at a quick example that they have inside of this list right here? How about admin development or admin deployment approval flow? So if we click on that, what will let up in just a couple seconds is an example of a flow within ServiceNow. And the way to kind of think of a flow is really just a set of actions stringed together that get kicked off through some type of event, such as maybe filling out a service catalog item like we saw a minute ago. And the way that these flows work is, again, just a couple steps all strung together, and then throughout these different steps there might be different conditional statements, such as maybe you need to loop through something, or maybe there's like an if-then statement in here. Those are all possible through these flows that are built out through this flow designer inside of ServiceNow. Now, in order to get started building out our own flow, the very first step that we're going to take is we're going to create an action. And to do that, what we're going to do is click this new button right here and click the action button or the action link. And what should pop up very quickly is a form asking us, what do we want to name this action? And we can name it anything. The name isn't very important, but what I will name it is maybe something like send to F5 fast. That seems like a good enough name. It kind of describes the action that we want to take, which is to send a REST API call to F5 fast. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this submit button right here, and this will basically create a new action. It'll set up a new action where we can start adding the different steps that we want to carry out, such as making a REST API call. So we'll do that now. So in order to make that REST API call, what we're going to do is under this action outline section right here, we're going to click this plus button. And what this does is basically adds an additional step to our action. In our case, what we see is a list of different options for steps that we can add as part of our action. But what we really care about is if we scroll down right here, we should see a step for REST, or to make a REST web service request. So if we click on that right here, what we should see is an additional step has been added as part of our action outline. And right next to it is basically the configurations that we're going to associate with this REST API step as part of this action. And the very first thing that we need to configure is under this connection alias section right here, which basically defines what is the system or REST API that we want to connect to. And lucky for us, we already have one configured right here that was configured as part of our Terraform template. And inside of this configuration, basically what's being defined is the IP address that we can see right here of our big IP that we want to configure. And then also inside of here is the credentials that it's going to use to connect to this big IP device. And again, this was all configured using Terraform behind the scenes, and you can look at the Terraform configuration to see how this was done. The next thing that we need to look at is the resource path that we want to hit for our REST API call. So we know our URL. What's the path for that URL that we want to hit? In our case, we want to hit the REST API path for the fast component of our big IP device. And the path for that is /mgmt, so /management, /shared/fast/applications. And what this will do is basically point to the endpoint again of our big IP device to create new entries for our fast applications and to use our fast templates on this big IP device. And then we have to say, what type of HTTP method do we want to use? In our case, we want to do a create, so we want to do a post. And then the third thing that we have to add as part of this is basically a header telling our fast API that this payload that we're sending it is being formatted in JSON. And in order to do that, under this header section, we're going to click this plus button, and we're going to fill out content type, so capital C, content, and then dash type. So if you're familiar with REST APIs, this should look very familiar with you. And then for our value, we want it to be application JSON. There we go. Had a typo there. So again, what this is basically telling our fast API is this is the payload that we're sending it. What we're sending the big IP is being formatted in JSON. And then the final thing that we have right here under this resource content is the actual payload that we're going to be sending the REST API behind the scenes. In our case, we want to keep this as text, but we want to use this little script button right here as our source of our resource. And we're going to fill out basically some JavaScript right here that ServiceNow is going to use to build out our payload that it's going to send to fast. And where we get the request content that we fill inside of this request body section right here is within our Visual Studio Code project that we were showing earlier. So if I reopen the project, as we see in front of us right here, and on the left-hand side, look for sn_scripts, what we should see is two different JavaScript files that we're going to be using as part of this demonstration. The one that we care about is the one called action.js. So I'll click on action.js right here. And as we can see, really what's within this JavaScript file is a very simple return statement. Return some JSON that basically converts a string that's being pulled from this value right here. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to copy this JavaScript that we have right here, and I'm going to paste it within our request body section. And I'm going to click the save button. And what this is going to do is basically save this JavaScript as the request body for this REST API call. And if I look at the code right here, if I look at what's being returned and what's being stringified, what I see is FD data, action inputs, but most importantly, this thing called fast payload. Now the question is, where does this fast payload come from? And that's the next thing that we have to configure, which is the actual input that this action is going to take in. And to configure that, what I'm going to do is click this input section right here. It's going to ask me, what inputs do I want to create? In my case, I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to label it. I'm going to call it fast payload, or fast space payload. And this is just a vanity name. It's not incredibly important how it's structured or what it looks like. But what is important is the name. And that's where that fast_payload came from inside of the JavaScript. This is the value that the action is going to take in when we create our flow in a couple minutes. And then finally, we have to define a type, or a type of a variable type or a data type that we want to use as part of this input. And in my case, I'm going to use JSON. So this will be a JSON input that we're going to be taking as part of this action. And because it is required, I'm also going to click this mandatory section right here. And then I'm going to save it again. So once we have our input and then the REST step that we're going to perform based on the input that we're receiving, or that fast payload that we're receiving, we finally need to publish this action that we just created. In order to do that, we just create or click this publish button right here. And it's going to ask us again if we want to publish it. We just click that to publish it. Now, what this is going to do, and the reason why we have to click publish, is this will give us the ability to use this action within our flow that we're going to create in just a moment. So let's go ahead and create our flow. And in order to create our flow, what we're going to do is click the home button in the top left. And what we'll see is the interface that we had earlier, basically listing the different flows that we have currently configured within our ServiceNow environment. To create a new flow, we're going to click the new button in the top right, and then click the flow link that we have under the new button. Next, we need to name the flow. The flow can be named anything. In my case, I'm going to call it F5 Fast HTTP, but it's up to you on what you want to call it. I'm going to click the submit button to save it. Now, once I've clicked submit, what we should see is the interface for our creation of our flow. And for this interface, it can be broken down into really two different key pieces. The first key piece is the trigger, which basically defines the event that we want to kick off this flow with. In our case, What we're going to do is we're going to click that add trigger button, and we're going to search for service catalog, because it's going to be a service catalog form that's going to kick off our flow. And under advanced options, it's going to ask us, where do we want this flow to run, or where to run the flow. And we're just going to run it in the background in our case and click done. The next thing that we need to do is we need to define the actions that are associated with our flow once it's kicked off through our service catalog. And to do that, we're just going to click add an action. And as we can see here, we have really three different options. We can do action, flow logic, which is basically some conditional logic, or subflow if we want to execute multiple actions at once. Since we have a really simple flow right here, we're just going to click this action button. And what we're going to search for is the action that we had created a couple minutes ago, which is under the global section. And what we should see on the right hand side, once it decides to populate, is our F5 fast HTTP action that we created a second ago. It looks like it's having problems populating, but if I type in F5, for some reason it pops up now. But what we should see is send to F5 fast. And if we click on that, what that should do is give us two different options. It should tell us the actual action that we're going to execute, which we know it's the send to F5 fast action. We created this earlier. And then the payload, or if you remember, the input we had defined as part of this action. And very similar, what we're going to do here is send some JavaScript, very similar to what we did earlier for our action. So we have some JavaScript that we need to define as part of this section right here. And where we're going to get the JavaScript is the same location where we got the action JavaScript earlier, which is in our Visual Studio Code project. So if I bring back up that Visual Studio Code project, what I should see right underneath the action.js file is our flow.js file, which is the JavaScript we're going to be using for this flow. And if we look inside of here, what we see is really a much more complex JavaScript script that's being executed than the one that we used in the action. And the reason why it's more complex is basically what we're doing here is we're taking the inputs that the user is providing us as part of the service catalog form, and we're converting it into a format that F5 Fast can understand. And if you were to look at this script at a very high level, you can really break it down into two different pieces. The first piece, or the first thing that we're doing here, is we basically have a for loop that is looping through a list of servers that a user is providing us. And through this list of servers, it's creating a pool list, or an array of pools that we're going to send as part of our F5 Fast payload. And then the second part of this script, and what we're doing here, is we're actually setting up the payload that we are going to send to F5 Fast. And this can be broken down into two different sections. The first section is the name of the template that we want to use under F5 Fast. So in our case, if you remember earlier, it was called simple_HTTP. And then that was under the examples folder inside of Fast. And then secondly, what we're going to be sending is the parameters that were defined as part of that Fast template. So things such as tenant name, application name, server addresses. So many of these things, if you remember earlier, should be very familiar with you. And the values that we're providing as part of these parameters, or what we're defining as part of these parameters, and what we're calling as variables or JavaScript variables here, are the actual values or variables that the end user is passing us as part of the catalog item. So this has a kind of a complex data structure to it, but FD data trigger request item variables is basically the variables that we're pulling from that trigger that we just set up a minute ago. And then tenant name is the name of the actual variable that exists within that catalog item. And then finally, what we're doing here is for strings, we're doing a convert to string, or a to string, because Fast requires us to send these values as strings. And then in the case of things such as virtual port and server port, which are numbers, we're doing a parse int, which is basically converting the values that an end user is passing us into an integer so that the fast API can understand it. And this is just a requirement of F5 Fast. It's not required for every API, but it's very picky in the case of Fast how values are sent to it. And then the very final thing is the server addresses, where we're passing pool, which was basically created as part of this loop that we talked about earlier. So overall, this JavaScript that we're looking at in front of us is creating the payload that's going to be sent to Fast and processed by Fast to create our AS3 declaration for our VIP pool and any profiles associated with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this JavaScript. I'm going to minimize this screen, and I'm just going to paste this JavaScript inside of this Fast payload section right here and click Done. Now recognize that this does not have to be the only step as part of this flow. You can have additional steps as part of this larger ServiceNow flow. So I could add a step to maybe reserve an IP address within IPAM, or maybe because this is ServiceNow, create a change ticket and close that change ticket when the change is complete. Really, what you can do with this flow designer is almost endless in its possibilities. However, we're going to keep this very simple in this use case, and we're just going to click the save button right here to save our workflow with the trigger and action configured, and then click the activate button, which does something very similar to what we did with publish for our action earlier. But what activate does is makes our flow available to our catalog item so it can call it once a user clicks submit for that catalog item form, which is what we're going to do next. But before we go into testing the service catalog item, there are two additional steps that we need to perform in order to get our configuration working. The first step that we're going to take is to modify a couple system properties that allow ServiceNow to connect to our big IP device using self-signed certificates. In order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to navigate back to our ServiceNow homepage, so this page right here, and in the left-hand nav, we're going to filter for system properties. And I'm going to click on this system properties link right here near the top. What this is going to give me is all the different system properties that are configured behind the scenes within ServiceNow that basically define various behaviors that occur and how ServiceNow is supposed to operate. What I'm going to do is I want to look for all the different system properties within ServiceNow. So I'm going to click this all link right here. And then there are two specific system properties that I'm interested in changing. And I'll put the link, or I'll put the names of these properties within the description of the video and on the screen so you know the name of them. But the first one is called Trust Manager Trust All. And I'm going to search for that right here in this search area. So if I hit enter, it should pop up at the very top. And what this is about, as the description kind of describes, is ServiceNow basically trusting self-signed certificates behind the scenes. So when we set this to true, which I'm going to do right here by double clicking the false and making it true, and then clicking this green checkbox, by making this true, we're telling ServiceNow, hey, trust all certificates, even the self-signed certificates. So the self-signed certificate that F5 is going to provide us. And then the second name, or the second system property that we're going to modify, is one called verify hostname. And I'm going to search for this variable also at the very top and then hit enter. And then what this variable does, or what this system property does, is verifies the hostname of the certificate. So currently it's enabled. What we want to do is we want to disable this, so turn this to false. And there you go. So we've set two different system properties that basically allow ServiceNow to accept the self-signed certificate that's on our big IP device when it makes its REST API calls. So this certainly may not be something that you would want to do within maybe a production environment, but for a development environment, this is completely fine. And in fact, it's pretty standard to do this for testing integrations like we're doing right now. So with our system properties set, we should be ready to have ServiceNow make calls to our big IP device. So one final thing we need to do in order to give our users the ability to fill out that form we have been working on earlier, and for that to kick off the flow, is we need to link our catalog item with the flow we have just created. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is within this left-hand nav, I'm going to filter for my items again, and I'm going to click on my items. And then I'm going to filter for all. So it'll take a second. There we go. And once we're in the screen where we see all the available catalog items that are created within our ServiceNow environment, in my case, I have F5 HTTP VIP at the very top, but if you don't, what you can filter on is, again, this updated column right here. You can do ascending or descending. If I do descending, what I should see is the latest created catalog item within this environment, which is F5 HTTP VIP. I'm going to click on that. And what this should bring me is the actual catalog item configuration that we saw earlier. And what I'm going to do to connect this catalog item to our flow is I'm going to click on the Process Engine tab that's in the center of our screen right here. And I'm going to set the flow to the flow that we had created a couple minutes ago. So in our case, it's very easy because there's only 3 different flows that are on this machine. And ours is obviously this F5 fast HTTP flow. So I'm going to click on that. And then I'm going to right click on this bar at the very top, this gray bar right here, and then click Save. And this will save the configuration for this catalog item. So now whenever a user fills out the form that's for this catalog item, it will submit it to this flow and carry out the process of kicking off our fast template. So finally, we're ready to test out our service catalog item that we have configured right here. And in order to test this out, we can either hit the try it button, or preferably what I want to do is test it the way that our customers are going to consume it, which is through the service portal. And to get access to the service portal, what we're going to do is within this filter on our left-hand nav, I'm just going to search for service portal. And what we should see near the top of the page is a link for Service Portal Home. I'm going to click on that link. And what that should open up in just a moment is the service catalog that our end users are going to interact with to request various IT services, such as maybe being added to like an AD group or a new server or a new laptop. In our case, we're going to request a new VIP. And to get that new VIP, what we're going to do is click on this request something link right here. And under this request something section, what we care about is under the standard changes subcategory here, and then under network standard changes. And if you remember earlier, if you're paying attention, as part of our Terraform template in our catalog item, we had it assigned to the network standard changes category. So that's where F5 HTTP VIP service catalog item is currently configured with other pre-configured service catalog items. So I'm going to click on F5 HTTP VIP here. Then this should look somewhat familiar to you. We see various different variables that we have configured as part of our service catalog form or service catalog item. So I'm going to fill these out. And the first one we're going to fill out is testing. For the tenant name, we can call this anything. Then for application name, let's call this test. For virtual address, I'll just give it a random IP address for our demo environment. It's not that important. But in your case, you can be very specific on the IP ranges that you want available right here. And then for virtual port, I believe it's simple HTTP for the template, so let's just do regular port 80. And then for a server port, we actually have some pre-configured Nginx servers that we had spun up as part of our Terraform template that are living inside of AWS right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put port 80 because that's the port that they're listening to. And then for the server addresses section right here, if I click on it, what's happening is it's actually giving me the ability to build out a list of server addresses that are populated from our CMDB, or what's commonly known as a configuration management database within our ServiceNow environment. And this is basically a database table that has all the different servers that we're running within our environment, or tries to kind of compile a list of different servers that we run within our environment. So what I care about is if I scroll down, what I should see is our SN demo Nginx 0 through 4. So we have 5 different Nginx servers, all starting with SN demo in this case, that were created and populated within the CMDB table is part of that Terraform template that we had launched earlier. So I'm going to click SN Demo Nginx 0 to add that one, and then I'll add a second one just to show that we can build out this list. So we'll add one right here. And then finally, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on this Order Now button. And what that will do is it'll ask who this request is for. In this case, I'm the only user, so system administrator. But if I click Checkout, what will happen behind the scenes is it will basically it'll kick off the flow that we had defined just a minute ago within the service catalog item, which in turn will make the REST API call to F5 Fast to create the different AS3 configurations for our F5 Big IP VIP pool, all the configurations that are associated with it. So a lot of different steps that are happening behind the scenes, but all that's being kicked off through filling out that form, hitting Order Now, and then checking out. And let's take a look at what those configurations look like on the Big IP device just to see and verify that they have been created. So here's our Big IP management console. Again, where I'm getting the IP address was from the outputs of our Terraform template, and the password is also in there. We covered that earlier in the video. And I'm going to log in with my admin user and then put in the password that was provided to me as part of the Terraform template outputs. And logging in, what we should see in just a second is our Big IP management console. We're going to look at a couple different things, or a couple different configurations that were created as part of that REST API call to F5 Fast, which is in front of us right here. But if you didn't land on this page when you logged into your Big IP, just a reminder to get to this page, simply go to Application Services, Applications LX. And then on this page right here, you should see a page called Application Templates, if I remember correctly. It takes a second. There we go, Application Services Templates. And what I really care about right here is this application section right here. And what we should see is basically the configuration that we had provided as part of our ServiceNow service catalog a couple minutes ago. So we see a tenant called test or testing, an application called test, and it's using that simple HTTP profile that we had defined as part of the flow. And if I click into here, we can see the additional values that we had provided as part of that service catalog item. So we're perfect there. And if we want to dig a little bit further, we can also go into our list of virtual servers and see the actual objects that Fast created behind the scenes. It's taking a second to load. There we go. And if I go to the testing tenant or the testing partition here, what I should see is the VIP that was created with the AS3 declaration that was generated through my Fast template. So that's what we see here. It's online. Probably because the pool members or the health monitors are successful. As I mentioned earlier, the Nginx servers are provisioned as part of the Terraform template that I applied early on in this demonstration. I can also go to the network map and view that and see the individual pool members that were generated as part of the Fast template. So overall, I would say this demo has been a success. We've kind of gone through the process of creating our service catalogs through Terraform, or at least the base configurations, and we configured our flow that gave ServiceNow the ability to perform a REST API call against F5 Fast. And then finally, we tested it out and actually executed our Fast template. We filled out our service catalog form, and behind the scenes, it sent a REST API call to F5 Fast, provisioning the objects that are in front of us right here. So perfect. It seems like everything appears to be working. Thank you for watching. For more information, check the description of the video. We should have some additional information in there. Thank you.